Hi everybody, welcome to chapter 5 and 6 lecture video. I'm going to try to make today's video on the shorter end. It is over 2 chapters and we will meet on Wednesday to take the assessment. So it's very important that you read the chapters and use all of the resources available online. But just jumping in, again, as you guys know, I don't like to use the PowerPoint and read it to you verbatim because you can read that yourself. So I'm just going to get my screen shared here and we will run through this and some of the highlights of what I think you need to know. This is Layla. She likes to join us sometimes. So chapter 5, language development, language diversity, and immigrant education. You do need to know the milestones and the different ways to encourage development. Just as a general development, this is probably stuff that you guys have heard and learned in different child development classes. So I'm not going to read it to you. So knowing the how and when language develops, there's the vocabulary and meaning. We have expressive vocabulary and receptive vocabulary. We have our grammar and our syntax, which is our word order. And then I've highlighted pragmatics because I want you guys to make sure you know this one because it's not one that we usually think of. But it is the appropriate use of language to communicate in social situations. Something that I've said in schools often is time and place. I'm not going to be one to tell you or tell a student what you can and can't say, but part of my job as a teacher is to help you learn when it's appropriate to use certain words and when it's not. You know, I talk differently to my grandma than I do to my best friends from college. So we all have that social interaction, that time and place. And that's our pragmatics and learning that. And our metalinguistic awareness is understanding our own use of language. So emergent literacy, this is when we're learning to read. So foundational skills and knowledge for the development of reading and writing. We have categories that are important for later learning. Inside category 1, we have our sounds and our codes. And this is where we learn the letter names and the sounds for each letter. Think of kindergarten. When I was in kindergarten, clear back, I'm not going to tell you when, we had the letter people. And my first name's Tana, and I will always remember tall T and he was made with teeth. I remember being really embarrassed by that. But anyway, letter names and sounds. And then category 2 is our oral language skills. This is our expressive and receptive vocabulary. And we use this to be able to understand and tell stories. But you need to know the codes and the connection to letter names and sounds. So here we have our inside out skills and our outside in skills. You guys can read those. They probably cover this a lot in your there's a class, at least I took a class on how to teach reading. So we talk about graphemes and phonological awareness and phonemes and how all of these play together and come together in order to be able to read. So moving on to emergent literacy and language diversity. So bilingual, obviously bi two means two languages. When we're talking about being bilingual, it's important that we encourage students to use both languages and not say you can only use this one or you have to use this one here. So encourage the use of both. We talk about additive bilingualism and subtractive bilingualism. Additive is where we keep our first language and we add another and we really have both. And subtractive is where we lose our first language when we add a second. And we see this a lot with our students who move in from other countries because we have such an emphasis on English and they stop using their native language. So that's subtractive bilingualism. Bilingual research tells us that they reach milestones in both. While we do think of critical and sensitive periods, we know that there's no critical period for learning a second language. We do know that it is harder and it takes more brain space to learn it later. So that's why we kind of refer to it as a sensitive period. You'll need to know the critical and sensitive periods and what that means for bilingualism. Nope, sorry. You will need to be familiar with academic language and what this means and how there's strategies for using those in teaching academic language. And those guidelines are listed there. Scaffolding is a term that I know you've seen throughout the other chapters of the text. And this is where we start with a bunch of support and we start to take it away. Because as students learn, they need less and less support in order to do more. And then as we come to new topics, we give them that support again, and then we take it away. And that's where we talk about scaffolding. We either scaffolded in or we scaffolded out, meaning we either start with a lot of support and take it away, or that's primarily how it's done. Or we start with a little, and as we get to more complex things, we add more support. So that's a little bit rare when it's done. Dialects, we have a lot of dialects even here in the United States. You're going to need to know how to handle this in a classroom. The best way to do it is you're going to model the correct way. You're not going to say, no, that's wrong, or I don't understand you. As a teacher, it's your job to understand when they're using a dialect and that this is their normal way of speaking, and just model the correct way to say it. For example, if a student uses a double negative in their sentence, you might repeat back what they've said, but phrase it grammatically correct. People do this a lot when they want to correct someone's grammar, but they don't want to call them out for it. It's not saying you said that wrong. It's just the next time they use that same phrase, they say it correctly. And code switching is moving between two different forms, usually between a dialect and a formal English. So make sure you go back and read the section on dialects. I recommend watching the video. So teaching immigrant students, we have different strategies. We'll spend quite a bit of time talking about ELLs here in just a minute. Generation 1.5, you're going to need to know what this means and how to work with these students in your classroom. So Generation 1.5 are students with education, language skills, somewhere between those born here and those that have just recently moved here. A lot of times these are students who are from other territories of the United States, or they are children that are born of immigrants. So they live in a tight-knit community where they have a lot of, they say, living in heritage language, where in their community, in their home, it's their native language is all that's spoken. But as they've spent time in the United States and they've gone through our education system, they have a pretty good grasp of English and our school system and how to work within that. So they're not quite immigrants, but they're not quite, I don't know if you guys can hear my dog barking, and I'm so sorry if you can. So understand Generation 1.5. We talk about, here's some terms for English language learners, ELLs. English as a second language is a class to teach ELL students. We have two different teaching methods: immersion, where they teach only in English, and then where we want to maintain their language and add English in. So when we are going to teach this, even if you don't teach an ESL class, you will have ELL learners in your classroom. So there are some recommendations here for teaching with these students in your classroom. And the sheltered instruction, or the SIOP model, is a way of teaching ELLs and improving their English language skills. When we talk about sheltered instruction, there's the 8 key elements. You're going to want to know those. The SIOP model, there's a good example on page 207. This is another really great example of, these are great elements for all learners, not just our ELL learners. But if you follow this, this is a wonderful model for our ELL students. Watch this video about how the SIOP model is more than just good teaching. There's effective and emotional social considerations for working with ELLs. So have learning activities that promote their reading and writing success. Give them plenty of time to practice, targeted corrections, not just try to keep it really high focused. Make the lessons relevant to their lives. Have them be actively involved, not just passively sitting there. Use various grouping strategies. Provide native language support. Involve their community and their family. Maintain high expectations and make sure they're clearly communicated. Learn their strengths and build on them. There is a challenge with working with ELLs when you think that they might have a learning disability. One of the questions you'll hear people ask is it an honest learning disability, or are they unable to communicate because of a language acquisition issue where they just don't know the English, so they're not able to communicate what they've learned? And so here's ask a series of questions related to what has their learning opportunities been, what have their experiences been, has there been any health injuries or illnesses on the part of the child or during the pregnancy? Thinking about, could there have been something that could organically be affecting their brain, the cognitive piece of it, and trying to use that to identify if there could be a learning disability. And so use this page, the 2.7, the checklist guidelines for identifying gifted students among our bilingual students. Okay, so that's chapter 5. I kind of went through that pretty fast, but I think I highlighted many things that you do need to know for the exam. Oh, I have to change which one is shared. I apologize. Okay, so culture and diversity. Jumping in here. Again, I'm not reading all of it to you because you can read. Understand that there's a broad definition of culture. When we're talking about culture, pay attention to the intersectionality of students. Don't just pigeonhole them into one thing. Avoid that stereotype as much as you can, because it reinforces a conformity, it stifles assertiveness, and it perpetuates that group of foreigners as others or us versus them. So just be aware of the stereotyping. Be aware of the levels of the socioeconomic statuses. We have upper, middle, working, lower, and all of the things that that can mean. Your application exercise for this week for chapter 6 is reading and responding to an article for Ruby Pains and poverty. It's really, really helpful, very interesting, and how it affects us as classroom teachers. How do we help students in poverty or living in poverty be successful? We need to avoid negative assumptions. A lot of times we will sometimes assume that these students are not very smart, or that they won't be able to do the work to the level of everybody else because of other hindrances. You might hear a teacher say, go ahead and surprise me by completing all of this work. And that makes me cringe inside, because that's really has a negative assumption for that student. So when we have these negative assumptions, we will set lower standards, either intentionally or unintentionally. We accept poor work, like, oh, we know that you didn't have what you needed at home, so you don't have to do the work. Well, now they're not learning the material. Instead of saying, here are resources available to help you complete the work, and I still expect this level of completion. And a lot of times these teachers will avoid calling on the students in class. Low expectations lead to low self-concept. There's the learned helplessness. And a failure to complete high school. They have a very high dropout rate. Believe in your kids, set a high expectation, and communicate that to them, that you know they can do this. Low socioeconomic students are more likely to have friends who drop out. They may be part of a resistance culture where they feel like a sellout if they want to achieve more, because everybody that they're hanging with is kind of appearing to be okay with lower expectations. Here's more on Ruby Payne, wonderful information. Again, set and maintain high expectations for these students. Talking about prejudice and the effects of Brown versus Board, knowing what prejudice is and how it affects students in the classroom and how we can maintain it and how we can avoid intentional and unintentional prejudice. Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka. This is where they came out and said segregation is illegal. Can't do it anymore. Separate is not equal. It's illegal. Kind of proud of Kansas in that in 1954 we did that. There's a video for you, so make sure you're recognizing your own prejudices. Avoid discrimination, even unintentional acts. That can be very, very challenging. I'll send out a link from Harvard that will help you can do to see if you have any or if you have any unconscious biases. Know what it means to have a stereotype threat. This is where a student fears her performance may confirm a stereotype that is held about them. Girls aren't good at science. So the stereotype is girls aren't good at math, so then we feel anxious about solving math problems. I'm sorry that the baby is crying. Almost done though. Gender bias is where a teacher or a material or a textbook confirm or favor one gender over the other. An example might be where the science textbook only gives examples of male scientists. So make sure as a teacher you're checking your materials and your textbooks for that gender bias. Creating a resilient classroom. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to pause. Okay, sorry about that. And we're back talking about resilient classrooms. This is about what you as a teacher can do to create that resilient classroom. So just remember that when we're asking about it on the exam, and how using the text and the examples it gives you for how you can do that as a teacher. Some of the best ways are help them build self-efficacy, their belief in their own ability to learn, help them learn behavioral self-control and self-regulation, and help them create academic determination, setting and reaching goals. You do this by creating a caring relationship, helping them learn how to interact and have effective peer relations, and creating effective home-school relationships, meaning involve the parents, help them understand that you are all on the same page. And you will need to know some guidelines for culturally relevant teaching. So experiment with different group arrangements, provide a wide range of learning materials, model. Make sure you have a good understanding of the meaning of students' nonverbal behaviors. As a school counselor, we say all behavior is communication. So if someone's doing something, they're obviously trying to communicate something, or they have a need that's not being met. Emphasize meaning in teaching, get to know the customs, traditions, and values of the students, and help students detect racist and sexist messages, and then help overcome those and eliminate them from the classroom. So that takes us to the end of those PowerPoints. A couple of things I did want to talk about just really quick was overall chapter 4 assessment. I was very, very impressed. A lot of wonderful scores on that one. Application 3.1 and 3.3 have been graded. I wanted to make sure that everybody knew exactly where